Old Roller Nation, bringing back to the show in his repeat installment number, I think 3 for the recaps. Michael Seals, my instructor, and generally a person that I don't like very much, who's only caused me misery and pain, and he also smells bad, usually.
I can agree with all but the last one. I don't know that I agree with that one. I think I smell fresh as daisies most of the time.
I think the operative term there that you said was "I think," and I don't remember. Giving you permission to think.
Sound like my wife, so I'm used to that.
I think she lets you think. You just can't talk. If it's anything like mine.
Maybe that's true. I don't know. I still think I get in trouble for thinking.
You haven't been married as long as I have. She's loosened up. I'm allowed to think now. I just got to keep it to myself.
That's still an improvement, though. I like it. So
Yeah.
I'm waiting to get there. So,
well, this is actually a pretty exciting episode for me, and I'll tell you why. I can't speak for anyone who is, a listener, but I can say from my perspective, I feel like I'm improving in my ability to uh, uh, quickly get people that obviously I'm interviewing them so they don't know me to open up, and I feel more successful as an interviewer now than I have at any point. I feel like because the subject matter is something that the people that I'm talking to want to talk about, it's okay that I'm not, a professional interviewer, just because the subject matter carries my ineffectiveness and sort of makes that, a moot point. But I feel like in the last 10, maybe 12 episodes, I've really started to hit a stride on the personal side. And I'm not one to toot my own horn. I still got a long, long way to go. But I feel like I'm catching a little bit of a draft, to use some of my NASCAR speak, and starting to pick up some speed, and I'm excited about that.
yeah, you're. I'll give you props on your interview skills because you're not getting any better looking. We know that. So something's got to get better, But no, this has been a lot of fun. I mean, congratulations on the likes. I think you just recently crossed over 1,000 views or likes, or one of
Yeah,
those.
yeah, we have 1,000 downloads, and on the audio only side, my subscribers have tripled in the last month. So I don't know if I've tripped something in an algorithm and it's starting to maybe suggest to people, or I've gotten enough positive reviews that like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever is starting to recommend the show. I'm not sure what is causing that, but it's really exciting. I also feel like I'm getting better. So like this has been an exciting time. I know that we're stuck in COVID, and it's not been fun at all. But I feel like this particular expression of my jiu-jitsu and grappling journey is one that is at least a positive that I can take from this experience, as opposed to just having all negatives.
Man, it's definitely been positive. I know just speaking for myself, I've been getting a lot out of these interviews as well. So, thank you again for starting this podcast because it's been very informative for me. I'm super impressed at all these people you're getting on. You call them household names in the grappling world. You can say
Yeah,
these people's names, people are going to be like, if they've been grappling for any length of time, they probably know who these people are. And,
yeah.
you've had them on the show and they've been very, very forthcoming. That's been just awesome to see. So,
I feel the same way. It's we're coming to a place where I don't have a huge following, uh, but I think the subject matter is such that there is a large contingent of people that really care about this subject matter. And at first I was worried that maybe I was alone. Maybe I was like the only guy that, that felt the way that I did. But it turns out that because of the subject matter, I've been able to get quite a lot of people to talk about it because it's their interest too. And I'm really excited about that. I feel like that I'm not going to toot my own horn and say that I'm onto something. I'm just saying that that gives me the opportunity to investigate the minds of some of these really high level people in both the grappling world and then from the physical therapy and strength and conditioning world. And hopefully we can start getting some more nutritionists. That's the one element. If we follow like the Dan John rules of just eat a ton of veggies and drink water and avoid simple sugars and like basically beige bullshit, probably going to do okay. But I would like to get some professional nutritionists. It's just that it seems like they're all really busy right now and nobody is like has time.
Yeah. I mean, I think with a lot of stuff, I know at least around here, so much stuff is shut down. There are probably far more people eating at home than 4 or 5 months ago, how long we've been
I
shut
don't know what's. Hold on a second. My dogs are losing their mind here. What is going on? I don't know
down.
if my neighbor behind the house like they have a really old dog that goes out this doggy door upstairs, and he's real slow and kind of he's in bad shape. He's got bad hips. So whenever my dogs see that, they just lose their mind. They want to go hang out with him, but if the windows are open, they see him and then they just start howling. It's really annoying. I apologize to anybody listening.
So with everything being kind of shut down, there's so many more people eating at home now, and maybe just in general, this is kind of a way people are just maybe taking more charge of their own health. So I'm sure, and it's good. It's a good sign the nutritionists are so busy. But downside for us is we don't get to pick their brains. Like we
Right.
want to have them on the show and hit another audience for them, but.
I'll keep sending my messages out because I do think it's that is an element of both performance and longevity that is incredibly important and of the highest value. And I will put myself as like the front of the line of people within grappling and jiu-jitsu that have basically ignored it. So I'm not throwing stones from a house of glass and being like, this is important and you guys don't get it. It's like, no, it's important and I don't get it. So I want to be able to share that and actually learn from someone who, that is their professional pursuit. Got a couple that I've talked to that have both said they want to do the show. They're just too busy at the moment. One said that maybe in September he'll have some opening, so we'll see. But not gonna count a chicken, but I think we can turn that around.
And the sooner people get their nutrition under control, the better. And I'll just speak from my own personal experience on that as well. So definitely a important area. So hopefully we can get somebody on.
Yeah, so let's start with the recap. And you and I had talked a little bit earlier about which episodes really were pretty darn impactful, and so I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on the outline because that was one. As we talked about it, it seemed like we were on the exact same page about what we wanted to talk about.
So I can't remember. Have we already discussed Mark Kukro, or are we discussing him today?
We I didn't go back and listen to uh, the second recap episode, but I don't think it matters if we go over it again. That episode had a lot to offer, and
Yeah.
I don't feel bad about saying like I've gone back through it and listened to it a few times because Mark is he's like one of those like sly geniuses. Like he doesn't put on. Like you're not when you're talking to him, you're not gonna be like, this is a guy that has it figured out, except that he does. And then after you listen to it, and go back through what he said, you're like, holy crap, it's he's he is a very, very insightful person. I'm hoping that we can get him back on the show pretty soon to talk about curriculum design, because we had Rob Bernacki for a second episode to talk about his ideas on curriculum. I'd like to get Mark's, because I'm not certain what his position is within the Pedro Sauer Association, but I do believe he was either in charge or very involved in the creation of the Pedro Sauer curriculum. So he has a lot of experience in that. And this COVID time period, I think there's going to be some training pods that come up, like not official schools where people are, kind of training in their garages and stuff. And so I think exploring curriculum design may be a valuable thing for some of the listeners that are going through that, where someone who's not experienced in teaching, or maybe is new to it, or wants to get the most out of this time period, curriculum design can be a part of that. I'm not sure how far it goes for everybody, but I know from my own experience, quality curricula do improve my outcomes pretty greatly. So the show's never been about my opinion, but I'm a big believer in curriculum. So like that's something that I will put my stamp on and say I would value that from anybody.
One of the biggest things from that interview, he probably had the most succinct way of describing what fundamentals are, probably out of anybody. Everybody always talks about fundamentals are so important. Fundamentals are so important. They have to be your cornerstone of what you're building on. But there's not always set agreement on exactly what fundamentals are. There are certain things that everybody kind of agrees on, right? This is a fundamental. Shrimping is a fundamental movement of jiu-jitsu, right? But what else? And there's a bunch of people that have all these, their list of things. Here's your fundamentals. Well, he broke it down and said fundamentals are moves that everyone can do that are reliant on science and physics. And that was probably the most succinct but also definitive answer that I've ever heard when somebody said, what are the fundamentals? And I was just like, there was a bunch of those moments throughout the thing, but I was like, wow, that was like amazing. And then when we talked to Dan John, he said something very similar as well. He's like, break it down and say, what are the movements that everybody has to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
Those are those fundamental things, So if we kind of like threw out a bunch of stuff, it was like, this is fundamental, that's fundamental. Well, it's like, can everybody do these moves? And if the answer is no, it's probably not a fundamental movement, right? Or is it reliant on your science and your physics?
Yeah. And the science and physics element is one that at first I had a little bit of a hard time digesting. And I talked to a friend about it, and he said, think of an arm bar. Like you're in that spiderweb position, like the person who is being attacked may have a gable grip, or they may have a figure four, whatever. If you are just strong enough to arm curl their arm, then not everyone could do that, right? Because not everyone would have the strength to just break somebody's grip and then, take someone's arm to a break just with a curl, just with their biceps. But secondly, that's not maximizing both leverage and the large muscles. So when you do that as a hip extension and maybe even a little bit of back extension, that's the large muscles working against someone's grip. And that's much more, we would say, scientific or based on physics than, just like a curl to take their arm to that, to hyperextend their arm. So that's how that made sense to me. And then once that came about, then it's like, okay, the armbar can both be fundamental or not fundamental, depending upon how you apply it. Because it is clearly a foundational move in jiu-jitsu, but you could do it in a fundamentally sound way or a fundamentally unsound way.
Yeah. So that, again, that statement was just one of those, like, you can star it and asterisk and underline it and write it and every type of thing in the world. Is just like, that was, such a big thing to take away from it. So that was fantastic. And another area that he made just kind of a quick comment on, was kind of interesting. Like, it was like, again, he makes some of these like quick comments that's like, if you're paying attention to it, you might have missed some gold. And it was just like, so he did this other one where it was like, warm up should have dissected movements that correlate to the technique. And I thought that was excellent as well, because there's, again, so much disagreement on how to properly warm up for doing jiu-jitsu. You know, everybody's like, our way's better, this way's better, this is how you should do it. So I thought that was just fantastic, because he didn't say, hey, you should have a dynamic movement section, you should have this section, you should have that section. He just said they should correlate to what you're doing. So your warm up should be basically progressively getting you ready to go into those techniques. So he didn't tell you like, here's how you have to warm up. He just said dissect stuff down, and it should get you ready to do the techniques that you're doing that day.
You know, what that, we were using the word correlate there, but that correlates to me a lot with Dan John with the Can You Go, which is that a lot of times the warm up is building toward the workout. If you can't do the primary movements of the workout, then the warm up is going to break those down and introduce you to them. If you don't hinge well, your warm up should have a lot of hinging in it. If you don't squat well, your warm up should have a lot of squatting in it. It's going to be different based on your needs, but it's basically reinforcing the fundamentals in a way that we can execute them. And so I think it's easy to just say like do 100 shrimps, but not in any way like, okay, shrimp down the mat and back. Well, that's beneficial just because you're going to be quote unquote getting the reps. But if you are getting those reps in a way that is mindful, and today we're going to be working on escapes from bottom across side, getting back to a guard. Well, shrimping in a way that's going to help with that, or the bottom amount to like your knee elbow escape. Having in your mind what you're trying to accomplish is going to deepen that physical correlation and the muscle memory, so that when you're in a spot, your brain is going to immediately trigger to go to this set of movements that will help you to deal with that spot.
Yeah. So that, again, just another little thing he kind of snuck in there that was like, I need to remember that and use it. He really discussed focusing on the fundamentals when you begin, and again, that comes across like time and time again throughout, like, no matter who's on the show, is it's like, focus on those fundamentals. And there's been a few people that's like, if you're in a competition track, you might accelerate one area really quickly to be successful, but that doesn't mean you're completely neglecting all the other areas. It just means like you make an A game and then start to build up the rest of the game as well, until you have, everything becomes, kind of A level movement. Yeah. He talked about, again, kind of similar to a lot of people, but he said, again, just a little bit different, where it was just like show up and train all the time. So we've discussed it, you've discussed it with a bunch of other people, where it's like, if you're injured, you can still show up and train. There's still stuff that you can do.
Yeah, even if that's just watch.
Even if it's just watch, that's a big thing, because there's so many people I've seen over the years personally where they got hurt and they disappeared and they never came back. Period. Never came back. They got out of the habit. And it was that simple for them. Like, when they were in the habit, they came all the time, and they got hurt and it got them out of that habit. So it's a way to stay in that habit no matter what. Like when you first started out, you had an injury. I was like, hey, just come in and just watch class.
Yeah.
That's it. It's that simple. Just show up. I mean, half the battle, or sometimes more than that, when you're first starting off, is just showing up. And there's some days that it's hard to show up.
Man, so many days.
I don't know if now there's still those days now. And that's like, Oh, like, but those, that is tough, but that's a big part of it is just showing up. Because you're going to get better if you show up. And everybody has said that just in some way or another. They've all said that same kind of thing where if you're just showing up. So like Eric Paulson said, it is just like consistency is the key.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing, right? It's just said slightly differently. So I just find that, fantastic. Everybody's saying that same thing, in terms of just being consistent, just showing up, do it all the time. Um, Another area with Kukro that was really really fun, really cool, and he described it as like the success that he saw on his competition team.
Mm-hmm.
Change, he changed the environment or the mindset in his, or the culture, mindset, all those things in his gym. And he changed it from this competition, like I'm going to pit you against you, and thinking that that's going to make my team better. And what he found was that wasn't the case. He did better when they changed it to a teammate me setup.
Mm-hmm.
Putting that team first, my teammate before me, and then me, actually gave him far more success with his competition team than it did when he was kind of creating almost a little bit of a toxic environment in his gym by pitting people against each other.
Right, and it wasn't intentionally toxic. The intent was,
I'll
okay,
make it better.
this guy over here, I want you to be competitive with them, every role. I want you guys to be in a competition role every role. And if I see you losing to him, it's gonna be a problem. You need to get better. And so people were only playing their A games against each other and not helping the other person to deal with it. So if
Yeah,
one person was consistently winning, they were just winning,
mhm,
and weren't helping the other person. So then what was happening was his competition team members weren't helping each other get better. They were just, like, we could use the old iron sharpens iron. Well, that is true, but it turns out that iron sharpens iron not by just rolling with it, but by saying, like, here's this thing I'm doing in my double leg that's catching you. So you get better at this, and then my double leg will have to get better to deal with you being better. And the other person who's getting double leg probably has something that they can offer to the person who's taking them down every time. So it's
mhm,
like when they create an environment where a rising tide starts to lift all the ships, then everybody did better in competition.
mhm.
Actually, I got some feedback, not specific to that episode, but from one of the listeners, and it was really exciting because they talked about how when they go to class, they come from an athletic, background, and every time you go to practice, it would be like, I'm going to give 100% because I want to be able to give 100% of the game, and all that, and that's absolutely phenomenal. That's actually really important. But the what they had kind of picked up from the show was that giving 100% does not mean like just trying to wear yourself out every time. If you want to be better at jiu-jitsu, giving 100% also means developing the most amount of skill.
Mhm.
And so that might mean losing sometimes, because let's say you're trying to work on your arm locks, and you gotta, if you're working on your arm lock from guard and you don't have that great of a guard, probably going to get it passed sometimes. But if you want to have a good arm lock from guard, you got to get in there and work on
And I
it.
think
And
that goes along with something else Kukro said, where he said mindset must be trained as much as skill set,
mhm.
right? So you have to have the mindset that I'm working on this skill. I'm not good at this skill. I'm going to lose some. I'm going to eat some, but that's okay because eventually I'm going to be better at it.
Yeah.
And that's tough because not everybody wants that, right? So some people
Well,
are, I want to be successful all the time.
I agree with you. I think maybe a part of it is what we would call ego, and like someone doesn't want to have to eat that turd sandwich a few times. But other times there might be just a sense of like, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing here. I'm supposed to be giving it my all. I'm supposed to be trying to always win. Uh, and so, like, training the mindset to say, well, yeah, we want you to do well, but we also want you to explore and to grow, and that's going to lead to greater skill and more wins, down the line than doing the same thing that you're good at every day and just getting like a tiny bit better at it every day versus exploring some stuff, because everything reaches a point of diminishing returns. So if you start to get to a level of competence with something that you're not finding, that big change in it anymore, you've reached, probably 90% of as good as you're ever going to be at it, then it's probably time to explore some other element. And that could be, maybe setting it up better, but it could just be doing something completely different, where you're 10% as good as you'll ever be. So you've got that 90% growth curve to assimilate.
Yeah, no, for sure. Other areas for Mark that really stood out to me, and it was like having to use both your like using your feet and your legs. There's a lot of times people almost forget it's like, hey, you've got a whole limb down there that you can use to do stuff to people. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really fascinating. He kind of touched on that a little bit more than probably I think anybody else we've had on so far. Um, but like using your post and your legs at the same time was an area that stood out. And then there was a bunch of things for him, so I'm going to kind of just pick one more and then kind of move on to somebody else. Otherwise, we could spend the whole time just kind of over his thing, which would be terrible. Um, but he talked about and something we talked about as well, and you've also discussed with other people, is like your attributes determine your game to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when you're first starting out, you kind of want to pick a game that's going to go well with your body type. If you're a big burly person, you want to pick a game that probably benefits being a big burly person, not a small squirrely person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's sometimes you like schools, at least in the past, kind of in the old school, like you got to learn this way, you learn this style all the time, and that can kind of hinder some people's progress. If you're teaching a small guy's game and it's a big guy, he might struggle for a really long time to pick up on that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say he'll never be able to do it, but they may just struggle for a long time. It may just be tough for them. And I think one thing that does keep people kind of around is like, again, having just a little bit of success early on.
Yeah,
Can
sure.
that it keeps that just that bait on that hook. And so we had talked about that, and you discussed it multiple times. Like you did privates with Jamel, and it was like, well, let's just see about a guillotine for you.
Yeah, because I got these little alligator arms. It's like if
You
somebody
know,
gets in there.
and he didn't say like, hey, let's start with triangles. It's not a killer triangle. So if you want to learn triangles, that's a great dude to learn triangles from,
Yeah.
right? But starting you off learning triangles was not going to lend to you having a lot of success early on. But
And furthermore, he has slightly shorter legs than I do. I have really short legs, and his are just a little bit shorter, which I like to always remind him of.
I would
But
definitely.
he has a fantastic triangle, and the reason that he has such a fantastic triangle, most people who are drawn to the triangle have longer legs. That's a pretty common thing. But Jamel, because of his years of Taekwondo and wrestling, has really, really high level hip and leg dexterity. So if there was anybody who could, hit the angle and tie you up in a triangle with a bad body type to do it, it would be someone like him. I did not have that. So my hips, Shakira's hips don't lie. Mine are just like, nah, bro, I'm never telling the truth. Like, so for me, the triangle is something that only now as a purple belt I'm starting to find from guard, because it took 5 years to develop a level of hip dexterity where I could be even okay at it. And that's still not a grade A move for me. And I don't expect it to be for a while. I think I'm closer and I will continue to improve. But just like you said, he was looking at me and being like, well, your hips don't move at all. So you ain't going to be able to do this. That's okay. But you can wrap your arms around shit. So
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and Malaki and a few other people kind of went into so like Brandon McCaffrey, when you had him on, he made a statement that was like master the principles based on your body type, abilities, and fatigue level. So
Hmm.
he kind of took it one step further, and so I thought that was just an awesome way of describing it as well. You know, um, so there's like a few people in a row that had some just like statements that were very very similar to each
Hmm.
other. And so that was one that was like, wow, that's pretty cool. He said basically the same thing, and he just took it again one step further, which is very interesting as well. So it's like, are you a naturally fast person? Do you have a naturally tough squeeze or something like that? So, it's like your body type and then what you can do. And then again, how tired are you on a given day? You know,
Hmm.
certain types of game that lend towards like if you've got an endurance based game and you're tired that day, might be a bad day for you. I don't know. So,
Well,
so I just
another
thought,
thing,
uh,
another thing that I really liked from Brandon McCatherine was that he had a big emphasis on personality type as well. It's like your choices about what's going to work in your game often are dictated by body type, but there is the caveat that your personality type might dictate it also. So if I just was bullheaded and thought I just think the triangle is this magnificent thing, I'm going to get good at it. Well, then eventually I would. Like it would take time. It would probably take more time than it took for me to get good at guillotines. But
which you're not.
uh,
Okay.
I'm gonna have to argue with you on that. I feel like I'm pretty okay at them. At least with my right arm. Like my left side is not that great. Um, I, but the point of that is that your personality and your tastes have a big impact on it too, and so you're not just a robot of like what your body type says you must be, and you're not a robot of what your instructor says you must be. Like you're in the driver's seat, and if you think something is cool or interesting, then take off and go do it. And if it takes a long time, it'll be worth that time.
One of the things I took some of the notes or some of the things that stood out to me with the Brandon interview was a lot of like that personal flair
Mm-hmm.
in it. So it was like he said a lot of things other people did, and then he put that little personal twist on stuff. So it was like so one of the things like he wants to create an environment to pursue excellence
Mm-hmm.
to your heart's content. So it was really fascinating because it's like, I want to set up this environment, this awesome environment where people can learn as much as they want.
Right.
You're pretty happy with coming in and staying at this level. Fine. That's great. And if you want to keep getting better and better and better, this is also a place for you.
Yeah.
There because a lot of people have been talking about how important the environment is, how important the culture is. And it's like elevate, 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 elevate. And he was like, I also started to pick up on just like, hey, not everybody wants to just keep getting better and better and better. Some people are content with the level that they're at. And he goes, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I can say from having dropped in there, like Decatur is not a big city. It's a pretty small, you community. It's I think maybe 60,000, maybe a little bit more. And he runs a very very good business. He has a lot of students out of a small community, and I think a big part of that is when you walk through the door, the first person that you're seeing is Brandon or Scaff or Brandon's wife, whose name is evading me right now, and they're saying hello. Glad to have you, nice to meet you, and welcome to our place. And you know, when you walk in there, you feel like it's a place where people are there to have fun and to take care of you, and you know what I mean, like they care about you. And so it didn't surprise me at all to see the number of students that I saw on that mat, given the size of that community. Once I fell in and was like, became a part of that community for the little time I've dropped in there two or three times,
Mhm.
because it's just from the top down, it's a place where you want to go back. Like you just want to drop in, you want to be a part of it. And so that thing of I forget how he phrased it exactly, but he said that his goal for himself and his standard for himself is to give world class instruction, world class teaching. That then you can do whatever you want with it. If you want to be world class, you can be that. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be a really tough blue belt, you can be that too. It's not my business to tell you what you must be. It's my obligation to provide an opportunity for you to be that, no matter how high or how low or how anywhere in between that is. I thought that was a really neat insight.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that's just kind of, like I said, a lot of the stuff that I took from him was kind of about that. Like he's, like you said, he's providing world-class service. If you want to take advantage of that, great. And if you don't want to take advantage of it, it's still there, but it's your choice not to use it.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to like, I want this world-class service and I can't get it, or there's a world-class service available, but I'm just not going to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's an
And,
entirely different thing.
and it's there's not a judgment attached to it. So if your goal for yourself is to get off work and get a workout and blow off steam and hang out with your buds, that's fine. Like
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah.
is a place that welcomes that. And if your goal is to be, a top level world class competitor, that's a thing that we can do too. I really, he really kind of elucidated, and that's my word for the, from Bernanke.
From Bernanke.
Uh,
You guys pick that up. I'm just saying. The word.
but
You don't even
he,
know.
no, I had to look it up. Like I didn't know what it meant. He kept saying it. I'm like, man, doesn't he know I'm from Kentucky? Like we discussed this.
I'm gonna Google search underneath. See what the hell that meant. No. So yeah, that's, which is awesome to just have like kind of no judgment involved in it, but still offering that such a high quality service. And I'm going to kind of combine a couple things there. So Malaki Friedman talked about being conscious of the mechanics involved in the technique. And then again, McCaffrey went on and said, like, once you have that base understanding of a technique, the details are your own. So it's really, again, kind of fantastic statements by both people. Is like, you have to understand these mechanics. And once you have those, you get to put your personal flair in it. Right. And I think that's a
Yeah.
lot of what this kind of, what I was talking about is like, there's a science and there's an art portion to kind of what we do. So there's this science, this physics, this mechanics that you have to do. Like that has to be there. And these details kind of have to line up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an art portion of it. And that's what he talked about again, is like, if you want to spin upside down and get into that armbar, great, go for it. And if you just want to sit in close guard and pull that dude's arm across and then go ahead and get into your armbar from there, also okay.
Yeah.
Mechanics, the ultimate mechanics of breaking the arm is the same. How you're getting to there, though, you choose how you want to get to that. So,
And I think there's even some, because we kind of talked about this. I think he used the armbar as an example, because if you take 10 world champions and ask them how to do an armbar, you're going to get 10 different answers.
yes.
And they will all cover basically the same points, but they'll all cover those points in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is because of differences in body type, and some of that is because of differences in personality. And so I really like that idea that the principles, which is what actually causes an arm to break and makes it efficient, must be aligned. And then how you align those principles are determined by you. And the example that really sticks out is a guy like Brian Freeman. His legs don't work. I think he has some use of his legs, but it's minimal. So certain things he's had to adjust, in a huge way to be able to execute those principles. But he's still executing. He's just finding a different method to do it. That's really exciting to me, because if we look just specifically at him, we say, well, he has disabilities that require that. But just like what you said with the art, that means that we get to personally decide how we execute on those principles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the individuation of the art, which is, if there is, I don't consider myself an artist I'm not good enough. But if you put a paintbrush in a kid's hand, they're an artist. You know what I mean? Like they're working on art. So I'm working on art, just like I'm a kid with a paintbrush. But that's okay. Eventually, I'll make some happy little trees. You know.
Yeah, yeah. No. And so another statement he had made that just went right along with it was give them a choice and then find out what choice or what option is best for you. So again, it's that individuality. And I think that's something that as a teacher, like I'm trying to get better and better at taking that into account of like give people some options and say, hey, there's more than one way of doing this. Try them out, see which one works better for you. Just know there's more than one way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need to find out. And so many people said that, and I can't remember, man, who said it in one of the earlier interviews, but they said that same kind of thing. We're gonna find out what works for you.
Yeah, I think
Your
Stephen Kepfer is who sticks out. Is like Sambo Steve was
yeah,
saying that his instructor in Sambo was like, "This is Uchimata. This is how I do it. Now let's figure out how you need to do it."
right,
You know,
yeah,
because obviously Uchimata is a foundational and fundamental movement of judo, and Sambo being part of its birth is from judo, so it's foundational there too. But the way that you need to do it is going to be slightly different than the way that I need to do it.
right, right. So I thought that was awesome advice. Something that I really tried to take to heart when I'm teaching, and something I'm trying to get out of this. Um, is one of the areas I'm trying to improve from listening to all these people is my own teaching. There's a lot of these people that are great teachers,
Yeah,
and trying to learn from them on how to be a better teacher.
yeah, and
Uh,
just on a personal level, that's something that I'm excited about, because I've watched your growth as a teacher in the 5 years that I've been there. And you started out as a really quiet, kind of introverted, and you're still introverted, you're still you, but over time, I've seen you continuously adapt both your game, your game grows, but also your teaching game grows, and I admire that. That's something that I look up to, and also I'm happy that in like a small way that this is contributing to that evolution, because I'm like I I'm not qualified to to say like I'm making you better, but
well,
I I am,
this is
I am
I'm
making you better.
it is no and like I said I'm very appreciative of this because this has just been awesome. Um, Couple of things. It went along with the same stuff about mechanics. Understand offense and defense of a technique. That was a really big thing for me because in my own teaching style, that's something I've really tried to do over the years. Is like if I teach the offense of a move, I'll turn around and try and teach the defense of a move or a position as well.
Hmm.
And then by doing that, what I found is people have just like a massive acceleration in their learning because they get to see the same position for an extended period of time and look at it
Hmm.
from different angles. So I
Yeah.
was really see like like a high level teacher who's saying like, hey, yeah, do this. And this works out really well. So um, moving on was Eric Paulson, awesome interview. Hilarious. Man, for all I mean, just an OG and awesome dude. I still can't believe you got him on. That was just hilarious. Because he was so fun, basically.
Yeah.
Like I don't even like. I think that's probably the biggest. Like take the information out that he gave, which was awesome, but it was just fun.
Yeah.
He was a fun dude. So
In terms of conditioning, pure conditioning, I think he is cutting edge for today, but was cutting edge for today in like 1985.
right.
Uh, he's that far ahead of his time. I there's a few people that you can put and say they're kind of like in that sort of genius category. Usually that's in one domain. With Paulson, it's like five domains.
Mhm.
I think that he's a grappling wizard, like kind of like a savant. there's a video that I saw a long time ago of him like in the 80s in his garage showing a guy like going through like a Shudo lock flow that he had created. And it's like 37 submissions, you know, like he's probably been grappling for 2 years like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, you can tell the level of brilliance that he had even back then. He was just far, far, far beyond, you know, like his time. And then on the conditioning um, but also having looked at some of, you know, the training stuff that he's written for CSW, uh, he's ahead of his time in like systems creation for his business too. Like there's a lot going on there that you know, like we could all probably learn a whole lot from Paulson. You know, like no matter what you're trying to do, Paulson's probably better at it than you are. Like,
Yeah, like I said, it was awesome. And so some of the big standouts for me from him, where he talked about everything is based on perpetual motion. And I thought that was really neat because I mean, really in jiu-jitsu, like if somebody's not moving, you know, or if you're working out and you're not moving, you know,
mm-hmm.
I thought it was just kind of a neat thing where it's like, and then he kind of went off a little bit on some other stuff with that, but just he applied it to a lot of other areas as well. But he was another person that talked about consistency. Consistency is the key.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things though really was fun for me was when he talked about work your go-tos, work your weaknesses, then work your weak side. He's like, those are three things, like you have to do that in order to really build a solid game. And that's something like people will argue with that a lot, where it's like, man, no, just work your strengths. Like, you know, just get those go-tos, get that A game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there are people that will do that all the time. And later on, when you talk to Emily Kwok, you found out like, hey, maybe that doesn't work all the time, right?
Well,
Because
it can get you to the top of the podium.
but it might
Uh,
not keep you on there,
yeah, it won't keep you there, maybe.
right? So I thought that was awesome because that's something I've really tried to incorporate over the years. I tried to do it for myself. You know, like when I first started getting into MMA and grappling and stuff, I didn't have a wrestling background at all, but I was very fortunate that there were some pretty high level wrestlers around me. And so I just, you know, tried to annoyingly pick their brain as much as possible to learn how to wrestle. And then also like working your weak side, because I know there's also arguments on, you know, you only need to be able to do a move on one side. So I thought it was fantastic that he said work your weak side. He
Mm-hmm.
you have to have the same skill set on both sides, but he said work your weak side.
Yeah, you got to at least have something.
You got to have something. And then the other thing was where he mentioned having that white belt mentality. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
everybody can teach you something. And I think that's just an awesome approach in general. It's like you can learn from anyone. And it may be just learning what not to do, but you can still learn from that.
Well, there's something that I'm reminded of. There's a white belt that I've worked out with a lot who he has a very natural grip fighting ability to get to a rear naked choke. Like if he gets on your back, it's really hard to stop from getting finished from this white belt. If I miss the grip fight, I will lose. I have to beat the grip fight, and so there's some efficiency there he has found in like getting under the chin and you know getting setting in the choke that is pretty darn high level because there's some black belts that have a harder time finishing me from a rear naked choke than this guy does, which is not to say that he's a black belt, but in that one spot he's very efficient, and so I've tried to you know like figure out what he's doing and talk to him about it to you know try and adopt it for myself. I think some of it is attribute based, but there are some efficiencies in his movement there that I hadn't ever considered and that I've actually been adopting. And until someone starts to break that down and beat it, I think you know like that's a new way for me to take on you know hunting for the choke that I would not have found on my own, and that no one else that I've seen really uses. And I think part of it is because he's just not that strong. He had to find something that was efficient because his body wasn't, strong enough really to just muscle it, So I agree with that idea of, like everybody has something. Like he's not going to teach me how to pressure pass, but he does have some pretty forward thinking ideas about how to hunt for the choke once he's to a place where he can do it.
Which is awesome. And then Emily Kwok mentioned something very similar to that, where she said, always stay open to other people's experiences and input. So it's basically another way of saying that same thing. You can learn something from basically anybody, right? So again, we're seeing just another one of those points that kind of pops up here, pops up there. These high level people saying that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Wells, cool interview.
Wasn't it?
Because he's, again, one of those guys, like he started off high level wrestler, then went into jiu-jitsu, and he kind of talked about one of those things that I really like, which is like blend those two things together, intertwine wrestling and jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yes, that's awesome. This guy's great. I love that. And one of the big things he discussed was the importance of drilling. He talked about it from a wrestling standpoint, but also from a jiu-jitsu standpoint. And he said that the importance of drilling can't be understated, and that drilling makes muscle memory. He said in high-level competition, if you're thinking about a move, it's too late.
Yeah.
Like you're not getting to it if you're in that competition, stage or platform or whatever. It's like you have to make that muscle memory happen. And the only way you make that muscle memory happen is by drilling.
And this is one of the things from Matt Harrison, who very recently interviewed, who's just kicking butt in the PGF. He's the oldest guy in the PGF, but when he throws that triangle at people, it looks fast, and he's like, it's not actually as fast as you think. He's like, but I'm very efficient at it, and I also have practiced it over and over and over and over, and I make sure, he's like, once I feel you being off balance, he's like, I know the green light is there to throw that triangle because it's harder for you to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a product of deliberate drilling. Like he knows how to feel that kazushi when it's happening, and as soon as he's got the green light, his body is primed to take advantage of it.
Yeah, which is I've tried to make comments, I think, similar to that to people in the past, where it's like people will say, man, you move so fast, and I'm like, I'm not really moving that fast. I'm just moving very, very efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like I'm moving fast, but I'm not. It's just efficiency. And it's hard for people to always understand the difference between those two things. But that efficiency does come from just that time and that repetition,
Mm-hmm.
because you could just be fast at throwing up a triangle on day one if you're just a fast person.
Right.
But if it's not efficient, it doesn't matter how fast you're throwing it up if you're never finishing it.
Right. And the level of accuracy and the sense of when to pull the trigger and when not to, that's really what is the dividing line for Matt. It's not his natural speed, which I think he's probably a fairly fast guy. It's the combination of pulling the trigger at exactly the right moment and being very accurate when he pulls the trigger. And those are consequences of a lot of reps.
Right. So one of the other things, like for Chris, that was kind of cool. He said some stuff that we've had conversations about in the past as well, where it was like just and other people as well, focusing on skill development instead of winning.
Mm-hmm.
He also talked about put yourself where you're uncomfortable, and that helps you work on your limitations. Right.
That's a hard one too. I'm still working on getting one of his friends who had a double ACL replacement, and they told him he couldn't be on the mat for a year, and he was like, "Nah, fuck that."
Yeah.
So he bought. I don't know if it was like pool noodles or something, but he got something that basically were splints, and then he was in like two boots, like that his legs were immobilized, and he would tape his legs together so that he couldn't bend his knees at all, and both his legs were stuck. and they called it the burrito guard. And so he spent a year effectively working similarly to what, like Brian Freeman was having to do. And instead of he basically became unsubmittable. And so that's a pretty, I don't know who wants to spend a year doing that doesn't have like a double ACL replacement.
Yeah.
But being in those places where you're uncomfortable frequently definitely reduces the anxiety there so that you can act more deliberately.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads into some of the areas for like with your discussion with Emily Kwok. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
This world-class competitor, world champion, who goes from the podium to losing every single match for a year, right? Which is a big fall. That's hard. Like even at these like local little tournaments, she was getting beat there.
Yeah. And say what you want about Emily, there's so much good and so much praise that you could give her to go from a high like that to a fall like that and not give up, not quit.
Yeah.
That says a lot about who she is as a person. Like, forget her, the jiu-jitsu person. Like, she's someone that I look up to, because I'll be honest, pretty much in my life, if I wasn't good at something, I would move on and find something else I was good at. Jiu-jitsu is really one of the only exceptions that I can say that I did not do that to. But to go from a place where you're like on top of the world and be like, yeah, I kick ass, I'm a fucking world champion, to losing every match, at like some local tournament, that's a hard pill to swallow and to come back. You know what I mean?
And then to come back and go back to the top again.
Right.
Just that's incredible. Again, incredible in so many ways. She had a few statements that, again, most of these we could just have whole episodes recapping the one.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to pick out some of the really big ones. For her, some of the stuff that stood out was she talked about technical and psychological answers for things.
Mm-hmm.
So, because sometimes a solution to a problem that you're having is not necessarily technical, it's mindset, right? Mm-hmm. And so the area you've brought it up multiple times in interviews where it was like you had a panic reaction when you mounted it first.
Yeah, it sucked.
Literally, we couldn't even get to a technical answer because your psychological response was overwhelming it. So we had to train a psychological response first. Yeah. And so I thought that was awesome to actually hear somebody say that, like put that into words and be like, sometimes it's not just, you can't get to a technique because your brain's not functioning, I thought that was awesome. And that was a great take home for stuff. It's like, I think you could easily pass over that statement. But I think you'd be missing out if you did. And it's very easy to say it to you because you had that so dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of people that have responses similar to that, but it's just a grade lower than that.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these kind of panic responses, but it's not as high of a grade at it. And so they're kind of having these like freak out moments, and maybe they're getting out of stuff because they're having these freak out moments, but they're not doing it technically.
Well, and to take something from flight training, I had a few students who they had the technical answers. Like when we were flying together, I could see them working through problems and dealing with them. But then they would go maybe to a check ride, and the only difference was that I'm not in the seat evaluating them. It's a professional evaluator, and suddenly having that person looking over their shoulder would cause them to second guess every answer that they knew was the right answer. But they just, for whatever reason, with this new observer, couldn't trust their own instinct. So they have the technical solutions, and I've seen them work through those technical solutions, but they can't use them because as soon as they start, they second guess, and then they would make a mistake, and then like blame it on like not knowing what to do. It's like, no, you knew what to do. You just didn't trust that you knew what to do.
Yeah, there's sometimes as a teacher, like there are certain students I just don't go next to because they just have that like freak out response just because I'm standing there. And so it's like I have to watch them from across the room and then come up later and
I might be one of those. I know every time you get
I
around, I
mean,
start looking real stupid. Maybe I just look stupid. I don't know. Like,
maybe I don't want to say. I mean, you do, but that's cool. Um, one statement she made, I thought it was just really cool and just kind of one of those like more like a life statement than necessarily just a jiu-jitsu statement. But she said jiu-jitsu allows us to train intangible aspects of ourselves that we don't get to in our everyday lives. And so when when people ask like, "What do you get out of jiu-jitsu?" Like, you're sore, you're beat up all the time. There's an answer for you right there. It gives us a chance to train something that you don't normally get to on a day-to-day basis. Um,
of,
that
of a direct example of that is this podcast. Um, Coming from aviation, in aviation, you don't present things that are not ready to be presented. Are not You're not at a level of mastery. You don't show anybody that you're in training, or you've proven yourself to be at a level of mastery. Then we can let you, take people flying. This podcast probably couldn't have happened with the mentality that I got from flying if it hadn't been altered by the mentality that I got from jujitsu, which is that it's okay to screw up if you're trying to screw up and improve, and if what you're doing is worth doing, it's okay not to be perfect at it. As a purple belt, obviously I haven't been on the mats for a while, but I'm nowhere near a level of mastery. There's a few things that I feel like I do pretty well, but there's a whole lot of stuff that I don't do well at all. But that doesn't preclude me from feeling okay and from showing up. It took training to get to there, because at first, like, to feel bad at anything was very annoying to me. Because aviation, you can't tolerate that.
Mhm.
But this podcast is a downstream effect of what jujitsu gave me, which was the willingness to work through something while people are watching, and that's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Um, so something that was kind of interesting, and this popped up, like Chris talked about it. I think Emily mentioned it, but then like some of the guys from the BJJ Brick podcast, multiple of them mentioned it too. And I thought this was really interesting because it was so different than like when I first started training. And multiple people said you should not feel obligated to roll with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so interesting, because again, it was very different than like my first. He was like, "No, you got to roll. Like if they come up to you to roll, like you got to roll, man. Like it's just how it is." And it's fascinating to hear these people that just said, "No, you don't." Like especially like Chris to say that, and like the level of dude that he is to say that, that's you know,
Well, and especially knowing what I know of Chris, Chris started in those early days when Pedro Sauer had first opened his school in Salt Lake, where people were dropping in to fight. They wanted to test jujitsu,
yeah.
and if you were a blue belt, you were expected to handle him.
Hmm.
Like, it wasn't Pedro Sauer who was always doing it. It was, oh, okay, my friend, this is my blue belt, Chris.
Yeah.
And you'd have to fucking fight this guy that you've never met, and he's here to tear your head off. He's not here to roll. He's here to
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so to hear him say that partially points to the cultural education that has happened in the last 15, 20 years.
Which I'm very happy to see.
Yeah, but it also, um, I think it's different to say that for your, like your old rollers. Like, I'm a purple belt, and if somebody come in and wants to fight, I feel like I could handle him. I feel like there's a chance that they could probably knock me out with one shot. If that happens, I don't have much to offer. But if they take a swing and miss, or I don't get knocked out, if I get within grabbing distance, it's a lot worse for them than it's going to be for me.
Mm-hmm.
But that don't mean that I'm gonna accept the challenge match. I was like, nah, bro, I gotta go to work tomorrow, and I can't do that with a big naughty black eye, you know.
I mean, so I thought that was really interesting, and like you said, it goes along with a cultural shift. And I'm very happy to see that because I think that keeps, like, if you feel unsafe training with somebody and you're forced to continue training with them day in and day out, like, you're probably not going to want to keep coming back,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or you're just like, your level of enjoyment is going to decrease, and then that's also going to decrease your odds of coming back.
And you know, McCatherine had a good point on that, talking about the culture of his gym. He's like, his job is to protect his gym from people who would run students off. Because
Yeah,
if you have to keep rolling with that person that you feel doesn't care about your safety, eventually you'll probably have to quit and go to a different place.
yeah,
And so he sees if that person is a gym cancer, then you cut the cancer out. You don't let your other students quit and you keep this student. No,
yeah,
you say to this student, you either shape up or ship out because I have a gym environment that I'm trying to cultivate and protect, and you are taken away from that.
yeah.
And I think that is different from the old days too. I think in the old days, you never sent anybody away. If somebody was, hurting people, it was like, well, the other people should have been tougher, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that's probably a pretty fair assessment of some of the stuff that used to happen. So quite a few people have talked about just personal accountability for your body, for your health, but also for your learning as well. And I thought that was something fascinating. Multiple people discussed, and more than one of these people have also discussed the importance of just keeping a notebook
Mm-hmm.
for yourself.
Yeah.
Uh, one person talked about, I think it was one of the BJJ Brick guys talked about, not just for techniques, but also like data collection for yourself, like while you're rolling.
Yep.
So I thought that was really cool. And he also talked
Yeah.
about is note progression should change kind of over time. And I was kind of thinking about that for myself. I was like, yeah, the notes I'm taking now, like if I was reading those as a white belt, I'd have probably been like, what are you like? What does this even mean? Like,
Sure.
so that was really cool to see. And then in a very similar fashion, so now going from a teacher standpoint as opposed to just a learner standpoint, Tim Sled talked about he gives people an outline
Mm-hmm.
when he goes to teach a seminar. And I thought that was fantastic because he's like, man, why not give them something to where if they write down what they learn will last longer, and then they get more for that money.
Yeah. And he talked about this. Um, he made a very cogent business case for it. He said, I don't have world championships to my name, because if somebody is hiring me to do a seminar, it's probably because their teacher or their friend or their somebody said this guy puts on a good seminar. He's like, so I have to go and create a product that's going to take you that extra mile. He's like, and that's how I get seminars, because it's word of mouth. Someone went to one of my seminars and got a lot from it. So now they're saying it's a safe bet that if we bring him back, we'll get a lot from it again. And what was funny and sort of sad and ironic is, in general, I actually give our guests an outline of the topics that I want to go over, with a question at the end. Is there anything that you want to go over that I didn't know to ask for? And they so usually that's not the case, but sometimes, like, hey, this is something from longevity that I've experienced I'd like to talk about, which is great. um, Tim is one of the only ones that I forgot to do it. And then we spent like the first 20 minutes talking about how valuable outlines are, and I'm like,
Yeah, that's hilarious.
ah.
That's awesome. Um, Man, he had so much stuff. He was one of the people I really wanted to, I definitely was very happy to talk about today.
And I'm gonna put this out there. We're gonna do what we can to get Tim to come and do a seminar with us, because like Tim, he's
Man,
close by. He's only a couple hours away, and I think it would be a great experience for everybody and very valuable.
I would just love to watch how he teaches.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't even care what he goes over. I just want to see how he goes over it. Like I can
Yeah.
get a lot just from that because, but yeah. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Fun statement that he made was jujitsu is mechanics, not magic.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's always a running joke when people first come. Man, how'd you do that? Magic.
It does feel like that though.
And it's so funny because it's like, oh, that guy is clearly a wizard. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way I'd ever be able to do that.
Yep.
And then 2 years later, you're doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
like, so how's that happen? Are we just teaching magic to everybody? You know,
That's why, and I don't want to bring this up because it's in public, but it's true, and it is important. When you gave me a purple belt, it really hit me in the emotional. Like I really cried about that, because I did not think. To me, a purple belt was like a magical god of fucking war, and I did not think that I actually would ever be that. I thought that I'd probably be like a blue belt, and that would be good enough. That's about all little Harrison had in him. Now, I am not a wizard. I know that. But I also know that if I came in and rolled with me, I would feel like a fucking wizard.
yeah.
And so that's why that was so emotional to me. And yes, Tim Sled is 100% right. It is mechanics, it is not magic. But it's also magic.
It is magic. To be honest, there's magic involved. Wearing your magical rainbow shirt, so I'm a little disappointed in your clown shirt, but
Yeah, I'm wearing the samurai today.
so he talked a lot about systems, and I thought that was really cool. He talked about each art has a system, and what you're trying to do is figure out the objective of that system.
Mm-hmm.
So then, as a teacher, what your goal is to build a system that's conceptually understandable. So you have basically a structure, it's kind of the skeleton, and then the students can start adding meat on it over time.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to add that meat just a little different area or at a little different speed or pace. But as long as you have a structural skeleton, you've provided, again, that kind of world-class environment for people to learn at their own pace or their own way.
Yeah.
I thought that was just really neat. He also talked about keeping a flow chart for class. And again, that's kind of like one of those things, like as a teacher, that's great. If you have that ability, like people can walk in and see like, hey, here's our game plan for today or for this week or for this section. Now people are like, oh, this is okay. Now I know what I need to be kind of looking at or focusing on, or maybe doing some study on my own. But he also talked about mapping your own jujitsu.
Mm-hmm.
That goes along with just, again, keeping that journal and keeping your notes on stuff. He had a pretty cool little statement of things where he said it's persistence, perseverance, and perspective.
Yeah.
That was
This is, I don't know if it's because he's an attorney, or he reminds me a lot of Dan John, in that he can distill things down to their essences, in a way that is immediately understandable. And I keep bringing up Dan John because, in terms of athletic performance, and strength and conditioning and stuff, he really provided that for me. Like, he gave me a framework where I could always evaluate something pretty much on the fly and say, does this fit the principles of what what I need to do to accomplish what I'm trying to do. And I think Tim Sled has a similar gift, of like clarity of mind and oration to really offer those clues of, like a way to look at something and say, does this fit what's required? Does it have the patience, the persistence, and the whatever the third P was? If it doesn't, then it's not gonna work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like you said, he just distilled some stuff down, and that was one of the big ones that stood out for me. It was like this quick kind of litmus test for stuff, you know.
Mhm.
And again, distilled down in a very just like quick and easy way to remember it.
I love that. That's another thing that I like about learning jujitsu from you is that you are very much a distiller as well. Like I tend to sort of gravitate toward complexity. It's a personality thing. Uh, you make a good, kind of counter to me because you go the opposite direction. You're like, give me one way to get to something, and I will just become, like really, really good at that. And so I like I need to have that person like consistently telling me to pare down what I'm trying to do and make it less elaborate. And so you provide that from a mechanical and a movement standpoint. But I think Tim, like I said, he and Dan John do that from like the oratory standpoint.
Yeah, so he just, yeah, again, great, awesome dude. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from him, learning more from him. Just super fun. Um, I took just like a few. It was kind of interesting, like with Stefan Kesting. I think because I've listened to him so much with different
Mm-hmm.
things, like I actually didn't take very many notes on him because I'm like, oh, I listen to him all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the one, so I took just a few big, like super key points. One of them, again, goes along with a bunch of the other people, was figure out how to learn. You know, again, how do you learn them,
Yes.
and find a way to get that because maybe your teacher doesn't teach in a way that fits your learning style. That doesn't mean you can't learn from that teacher. That
It just
doesn't
mean
bad
yeah.
place. It just means you might need to make some adaptations to your learning style. And if you communicate, your teacher may be able to adapt to what
Well,
you.
and I my personal experience has been that because I learn a lot more from explanation and from direct feel than I do visually. And you are a visual explainer. You don't use a whole lot of words, and you're not like, just because of time, you can't let everyone be your uke for class so that they can feel what you're trying to do. Um, so you and I have had a 5 year conversation on how I learn and how I need to, um, you know, practice things so that I can get more from the way that you teach. And and you're exactly right. At first, my way of learning was not that compatible with your way of teaching. So I had to find ways to adapt it and to grow and to communicate with you about what I needed in order to get more out of it. And I can say that like the rate of my absorption within the last few months of pre-COVID training was astronomically higher, not just because I was better and capable of understanding more, but also because you and I were closer to, like come closer to that place where you could teach closer to the way I needed to learn, and I could learn closer to the way that you teach. So we were, like that's been a very valuable conversation that we've had.
Mhm. Stefan also talked about, he said it, and I can't remember who he did like DVDs with. It might have even been Emily or a few other people, but he was
Mm-hmm.
like, it's a big thing. I know I learned it from judo as well, where it's my grip or no grip.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember we had some guys in the judo club. They talked about when they would go against some of the Japanese guys, and like the Japanese would let you get your grip, and pretty much everybody else comes out and gets their A grip, right? You come out,
Yeah.
it's my A grip, and they'd break your grip, and they would never let you get it again. So they never had to deal with your A game,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, they, again, it's one of those things where it's like they look like wizards, but it's like, why did they look like wizards? Well, they took you out of your A game, so your A game might have been good enough to beat them, but your B or C game wasn't good enough to beat them.
Yeah.
You know, so that was awesome. And again, I can't remember if it was like he did that with Emily Kwok or somebody else. And then Chris Wells also kind of talked about that some. in terms of like you want your grips, don't let them get theirs. Something I really try to reiterate. Chris talked about it from the standpoint of risk control, and then but Stefan just kind of talked about it in just in overall terms of like it's my grip or just we're just not going to engage at all.
Yeah, and that goes back to Joel Bain, my ties or no ties.
Yes. So again, common things we're seeing throughout, just said slightly different. Um, he talked about it and as well, and I loved it where because I can't remember how old he is now, but he's had a lot of health issues just
Yeah,
in life in general, with his like kidneys and stuff like that. But he talked about you want to do anything you can to not get injured. So he didn't necessarily go into like you have to strength train or you have to do flexibility training or you have to do X, Y, and Z. He just said you want to do anything you can. So what does that mean? Well, again, it may be slightly differently. Maybe I need to do some more strength training. Maybe you need to do more flexibility training. Maybe you need to do more cardiovascular work.
hmm
Like, it's just do anything you can to not get injured. And he also talked about keep revising your game over time. Also, something I love because it means you're constantly improving. If you're constantly revising your game, you're constantly getting better, constantly learning, constantly improving. And that's what most of these people talk about. They want an environment where people are consistently learning and improving over time. And one way to do that is just revise your game,
yeah,
keep making it better over time. The second time around with Rob Bernacki was awesome because of how much he talked about curriculum development, and also why I'm really excited with Mark Kukro to potentially be back on the show and talk about
hmm
curriculum development as well.
yeah. Because
Because
I think it'll be an opposing view, but I also think that you're going to see a lot more parallels than might be obvious at like first glance.
which is perfectly fine. It was just it's one of those things where like when I first started out and I was very honest about it with most of my students where I was like I can tell you what I want from a blue belt. Here it is. Here's my curriculum. Here's what I want. When you can do these techniques against a resisting opponent, you got a blue belt. And it's like, what about purple belt? I'm like, I don't have a clue. To be honest, I was like, they just handed it to me, and it was like I didn't have any idea. And so it was nice to have somebody kind of outline it in a very different fashion. Because I have seen other places where it's like you got to know 40 moves for your blue belt, 80 moves for your purple. It's like they just have this huge, massive list of moves to do.
Yeah,
And he boiled it down to a little bit more of that kind of like structure or skeleton idea that some of these other people have talked about, like Tim Flood talked about putting that skeleton structure, right? Um, Rob said it as like curriculum gives a structure that you can express yourself around. So
hmm
again, going back to like Brandon McCaffrey and Malaki Friedman and some of those people, like you get a chance to have your own personality within a structure. And again, I think that just allows people to like accelerate that learning process or kind of leapfrog the learning process. Whereas if it's you have to learn this move at this time, maybe you're not ready for that move yet.
hmm
Maybe you don't like that move. Maybe you're not built for that move. So I really just I liked how he kind of expressed that, just about his curriculum and how he likes to keep a somewhat of he kind of called it a loose curriculum, where he has like a guideline on what he expects from the belts, but nothing specific for it. Where it's like for blue belt, he requires like a long range guard and a short range guard,
hmm
but it doesn't tell you like which one you have to do for that blue belt. It's like
yeah,
you have to have one of a short range and one of long range. Not you need to have uh, classic triple threat from close guard to get to it. So just a very interesting way of approaching curriculum.
yeah.
Very different than what I've seen with a lot of places. So I'm very interested to hear kind of what Mark Kukro has to say about it because, like you said, it may be different, but though I think there will also be, if we boil it down, just a lot of similarities between the two. So
hmm
Very, very awesome. So he made a statement that's again similar to some of the others where it was make things clear, but give people freedom as to what they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Make your expectations clear, make the guidelines clear on things, but give people that ability to kind of work on things that they want. So pretty awesome. And then he also mentioned it again where it was like developing layers of skills and fundamental movement patterns. And again, you could say the same thing. Tim Sled said that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, everybody's been saying that same thing where it's like have fundamental movement patterns and then build your layers on top of that, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so again, we're just seeing that. So I can't emphasize it enough. You know, I've said it however many times just in this recap because I think it's so important of like start to layer things on top of each other.
And he even talked about it. I think for brown belt, he expects you to have 4 really good guards,
Mhm.
and he's like they can be disconnected. They don't have to be connected. He's like, but it'll probably be helpful if they are connected.
Connect in
And
some
he's like,
fashion.
I won't tell you that it must be, like you could have close guard and 50-50 guard. That's, it's a little, you could get to those two between the K guard. He's like, but like I'm not going to say that it has to be one or the other, but it'd be helpful to you if they do relate to one another that you can flow from one to the other.
Yeah. So I just thought like he just has really cool stuff on curriculum development, you know.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a fantastic one. So any teachers out there, instructors out there, definitely a good one to check out from that standpoint. I learned a ton from both his interviews, but in particular from this one in terms of kind of setting up curriculum development stuff. Because again, from my own background, I never really had a clear understanding of like what was expected for a purple belt or brown belt. It was like I knew what people wanted out of a blue belt and out of a black belt, and then it just seemed like there was this anonymity between those two things. You know, it's
Yeah.
like blue belt, you got a foundational understanding of jiu-jitsu, and then black belt, you got a pretty good understanding of all these areas of jiu-jitsu and can execute a wide variety of things.
Yeah.
And it was like, what's in between? They're kind of like, we'll just, you know, no, I
I,
don't. And they're like, we'll figure it out.
I like Henzo Gracie's definition of a brown belt. He's like, it's basically a black belt, just without all the respect.
It is true. It's true because the black belts try and smash you, and the purple belts are gunning for you nonstop. So, yeah, it's a rough place to be. Purple belt's a pretty rough place to be, too, actually. A lot of people gun for you there. Um, uh, I thought your interview with Eric Bolander was really neat.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the first time you brought on somebody that's not a grappler,
But he's an artist.
but he's an artist. And
Yep.
so he said, and he also is a coach, a teacher in
Mm-hmm.
particular. And so he just had these statements throughout that again apply across the board. Quality over quantity repetitions was one of the big ones for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mindful practice.
and that correct intentional repetition. And then he made a statement again, confidence comes with repetition, very similar to like Wells and those other guys where like that repetition, that unconscious muscle memory. And Eric was like instinctive, reflexive, trained responses. All that is, what's that mean? That's muscle memory right there in a
Mm-hmm.
nutshell. He just broke it down even more.
Yep.
So cool to hear that stuff. And he again talked about you have to have foundations to build a skill set, and it doesn't matter what that skill set is. Like he talked about it a lot from art. You know, he's like, what's kind of a foundational skill for art is the ability to draw. He's like, and so you sit down and you have to have this like, here, I'm going to teach this kid. You may have no artistic ability when you first come in or no training in it whatsoever, and I can still teach it to you because
Yeah.
there's things you can just learn it.
And furthermore, the skill of being able to draw once you've come to a place where you can understand how to create an image, then you can take that skill and you can turn it into sculpture. You can turn it into other like other methods of drawing, or you can turn it into computer art. But if you don't have that foundational skill of being able to create images in space, then you ain't going to sculpt and you ain't going to do graphic design. You've got to start with some way of being able to create an image that is understandable to another person.
Hmm. And so that's just basically his idea was like you build a scaffold and then add to it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
same thing as like have a skeleton and put meat on it. You know, again, same way as or a different way of saying that same thing.
Yep.
And he talked about it, and then this is one of the things like you've discussed with other people throughout, and I couldn't necessarily pick out one right off the top of my head, but it's like, am I better than me? And I know I've had that conversation with you on multiple occasions just from my own journey, where I'm like, the me today would be subbing that me from a year ago or 2 years ago. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I could beat him in grappling. You know, now the me right now would probably not be the me from several years ago in MMA, but I was actively competing then, and I'm not actively competing now. So, you know, but it's basing things like that improvement is really good if you're comparing yourself to yourself, as opposed to like comparing yourself to somebody else can be very hard and can be very demoralizing over time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you just happen to be like one of your training partners is a freaking savant at jujitsu or whatever it is, then it's like, this sucks. Like I don't want to keep training. Like this guy is so freaking good, you know. It can be
Mm-hmm.
demoralizing, you know. So having kind of an approach where it's like, am I better than me? You know,
Yeah.
am I continuing to improve? Am I revising my game over time? So very, very cool interview. Just because again, you can take it from somebody who has no grappling experience whatsoever, but you know, an athletic background, an artistic background in multiple areas. You know,
Yeah.
like I mean, obviously he's got graphic design, but he can draw, and he's an art teacher. He's also, you know, a musician as well. So just an
Yep.
artist in it.
Yeah. I
Basically,
mean,
all, uh,
he's a signed recording artist. He has a record deal. Um, and what was also interesting is he was the first person who really talked about how his time in the military affected his teaching himself to do other things. Because in the military, if they were doing some sort of a drill or they were practicing something, it was always in full gear with with everything set up the way that it would be if you were fighting with it. Because you need to know how your body feels when you are, in full battle dress,
mhm.
and what you can and cannot get away with. Because maybe you can run 3 miles at a real good clip, not carrying your weapon and 400 rounds of ammo or whatever it is he's supposed to carry. But suddenly you start packing on 100 pounds worth of gear, and 3 miles is the limit of how far you can go, and it sure as hell ain't at a good clip. So it changes all your decision making changes based on the situation of how you're equipped and what you have. So you got to know how you feel when you are equipped. And I think to jujitsu, we kind of have that in spades because we actively spar, and so we don't do a lot of like dress rehearsals. You know what I mean? Like we just get in there, slap bump, and effectively fight. Now there are people within the gym who have done like the jits with hit stuff, and I think that's just fine. I don't prefer it because I don't like getting hit in the head, and this is not for me training to be purely for self defense or in a fight. But I see the value in that too, and if that is your interest, then you do need to be training that way sometimes.
Mhm.
So I think jujitsu kind of checks that box of training how you fight because, like I said, you slap bump and you get after it. It's not staged. It's not someone who's being a compliant uke aikido style. It's and that's not bagging on aikido. It's just that the the ukes tend to be pliable and compliant. In jiu-jitsu, there's not that situation at all. It's like the opposite of pliable and compliant. They're trying to crush you too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but again, just a really cool interview. Just to hear again those same things in another area, like
Mm-hmm.
these lessons, these same things. Like we should be taking note of that they still apply. You know,
Yep.
they're applying in so many different areas. The the interview with Jake Shannon was so cool because that's again like this kind of OG character, uh, just from catch wrestling standpoint.
Yep.
So there may be some of the jiu-jitsu guys who may not have been super familiar with him, but being a little bit of a fan of catch wrestling myself, I knew who he was. I never actually realized how many health problems he had, so that was kind of neat to actually uh, like to hear about. That was like pretty cool. Not cool that he had those things, just like interesting to like find out actually all the stuff that he legitimately went through.
Right.
Man, it was so cool just the way that he talked about and reiterated like you have to take charge of your own training.
Mm-hmm.
And his story was a very extreme example of it because like you mentioned, you're like, hey, when I decided I want to take up jiu-jitsu, I Google searched it and there's 5 gyms, within a few miles drive of your house. That dude like moved, across the country and like
Sent
lived.
letters to random addresses on the hope that he could find the person that he was trying to learn from. I mean, think about that. That's not phoning it in. Say what you want about Jake. There's a whole lot of people that have criticisms of him. He doesn't phone it in. You might not like him, and that's fine.
And
But you
that
can't say he's just phoning it in.
No, that was so it was so neat to hear that story as being a prime example of like you just have to take charge of your training, you know. Um, so just very very cool. Um, it was neat to hear him kind of talking about like when you were like what's one of the things that you would suggest to increase your longevity, in particular, and how he talked about yoga and
Mm-hmm.
the background of yoga, like the connection to kind of the Hindu wrestlers, and their conditioning programs and that, kind of physical culture idea. I remember watching some documentaries on those wrestlers, long time ago, and it was like the kind of Hindu squats and Hindu push-ups. It's just like they would just do repetition after repetition after
Yep.
repetition. And so it's just very, very cool, because I think a lot of times, um, men would be very averse to saying like I do yoga. I think it's a little more acceptable now than maybe even like 5, 6 years ago.
Sure,
Uh,
and you got guys like Joe Rogan saying you got to go do it, and that helps. But I'll be the first to say that's not something I would be interested in because I think it's too foo-foo. Uh, I can't say I have a problem with seeing a bunch of soccer moms in yoga pants, but but that's not like I'm not going to get a workout. Like
Uh, so it was really interesting to hear him talk about that. But again, just like that kind of background information, where it's like I didn't investigate to that extent. Like I knew what the Hindu wrestlers conditioning program was, but I wouldn't have necessarily been like, oh yeah, they're doing yoga. I wouldn't have probably
it's
put those things together.
it's not a connection that I would have made, and so that did open my eyes to that, and I have started actually incorporating. There's a ton of yoga classes on YouTube, and so if I don't have anything else on my mind for a workout, I'll just pull that up, and I've started doing it, and I fucking hate it, but it has changed some of the ways I think about things, and so once again, the podcast has accomplished what the podcast was supposed to. It has opened my eyes to something that I could not have found on my own.
Yeah, which is awesome. Again, it's awesome. I've always I've always kind of mentioned that to people where I'm like, you should do yoga, and then I just kind of like look away where I'm like, I don't want to see what their response is when I say it. They're like, what is this guy telling me? I just kind of say it in passing and let them do with it what they want. But hearing how he talked about, if people aren't familiar with like the Hindu wrestling culture, just YouTube it sometime. Like it's fascinating just how like tough and durable these guys are, where it's that, again, that idea of like a physical culture. And he kept talking about that multiple times. And then when he was talking about kind of like your conditioning stuff, where he really distilled it down, where it's like your grip strength and then lifting live weight are two of the most
Mm-hmm.
important things when it comes to grappling, right? Because lifting a live weight is so different than like getting in and deadlifting or cleaning like something with a bar, right?
Yeah.
There in some ways is kind of an inherent stability that goes along with lifting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a live weight, whereas lifting a live weight is inherently unstable.
Yep.
And also why I think you see so many people advocate like kettlebells or mace balls or things like that for training, because they offer that inherent instability while you're training.
Yeah.
And so like that translation, there's far more like direct translation over into your grappling when you're doing things that are more of like a live weight style workout. And also why I think you see in like the Russian conditioning programs and a lot of the wrestling conditioning programs, a lot of stuff is like, hey, toss that person over your shoulder and go run them down the mat, and then they're going to toss you over your shoulder or over their shoulder and run you back down the mat, and then you do squats with them and you do sit ups,
Yeah.
do all these like just with an actual body. Having done some of those workouts, those were like intense workouts.
Mm-hmm.
So I can definitely understand why he advocated for that, because where A is very, very effective, but B, it translates over. A lot of like some of the exercises in those programs are really basically just like techniques that you would do or
Yep.
potentially in an actual match. Um, and then he kind of went. He made a statement that was very, and I think Marcelo has said it as well in the past, where he said grappling is the best conditioning for grappling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how'd you get ready for this tournament? Well, I just rolled. So I thought that was really interesting coming, again from a guy who's kind of run the gambit of all this random stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
what I will add to that, I agree with that to some degree, but I also think that there is something to what you kind of clued me into, the idea of energy systems training. And everybody has a dominant energy system that they work really well in, and then they have some that they're not that efficient in. And so I was pretty darn good as a, coming from a powerlifting background at that ATP, 10 to 15 second range. I had a lot of power, but not a lot of recovery. And so where I have had within my conditioning the best improvement in my grappling from conditioning is in power endurance training, which I've talked about the interval set that you gave me to improve that energy system, and then long slow cardio, which I hate. I fucking hate it. I hate it. I hate it. But what I have found is that by doing it, my clip of power endurance recovery comes up. So I can sprint and then more quickly recover from that sprint. And so I can go back into that um, that zone where I'm good. So it has, and I also think that there's just in terms of long, slow cardio, the capillarity for the heart. Like some of us have followed like Team Hoyt, and the father pushes the son on a wheelchair,
mhm.
and they do marathons together. And in one of the marathons, the dad, and I can't remember his name, it may be Dan, but he had a
Yep.
heart attack
Yep.
during the
Right.
the
Yep.
the race, didn't
It's,
know it, and his heart incurred almost zero damage because
it
his heart
was
was so capillary dense
oh,
that he could have a blockage in one and it didn't matter. And so I think just in terms of, like my family history is like everybody dies of heart attack. So I have a responsibility to my kids to do what I can to survive one, which I think is probably pretty inevitable for me. And I'm not trying to get dreary. I'm trying to say like I have a genetic preclusion to that. So I gotta do what I can to up that capillary base. The good news for my uh, athletic side is that I have found that it also improves my athletic performance by speeding up my recovery so that I can be athletic longer and more during a round. I can be more athletic for more time.
Mm-hmm. I just think that goes along with, what are your weak areas?
Mm-hmm.
If you got zero gas tank, man, it's going to be hard to grapple and be in better shape, because you're just going to gas so fast that it's like, you might want to do some working out outside of here, you know, in addition to this, so that you can actually survive longer
Yeah.
than 2 minutes or whatever it is. So for me personally, so he made that statement, and it was one of those like I just kind of put it down because I've heard that across the board, and it is one of those like I agree and I don't at the same time. Like I'm much more along the lines of like I think you should be doing stuff outside the the mats, to improve yourself, um, because it'll add to your longevity, both in jujitsu, but just in life, and also that quality of life. Just being like be stronger, be more fit, be more mobile, all those things. Like basically,
Mm-hmm.
just be a better version of yourself or the best version of yourself, and give yourself a chance to live like a really nice life. You know,
Right.
take care of yourself, and that goes along with like eat your vegetables, drink your water. you know Someday we'll be able to say more than that whenever we get a nutritionist on. We can just quote them. uh, but the agreement on some of these meatheads so far is like eat vegetables and drink water. So
I think for the meatheads, it's drink water, eat meat, and add pre workout.
uh, I think I just think overall, we're starting to really see as you get more and more episodes into this, how many similarities we see, both within just grappling arts in general. So, Jake is a lot different. Not even, I won't say a lot different. He's just different from the other grapplers we've had because he's a catch only guy.
Yeah.
Whereas Joel is a catch guy and also jujitsu black belt as well.
And Jake talked about, when we were talking about some of the cultural ideas, and why he thinks that catch wrestling can never be as big as jujitsu. Uh, and it was so funny that he put this together because I never thought of it. He's like, basically, I think of catch wrestling and jujitsu as like powerlifting and CrossFit. Because powerlifting, if you go to a powerlifting meet, it's ugly, it's burly, it's smelly. It's like it's never gonna be, it's never gonna proliferate. But CrossFit took some stuff from powerlifting and some stuff from Olympic lifting and various other places, and made it palatable to suburban soccer moms. And he goes, and jujitsu kind of does the same thing. Like catch wrestling is ugly and mean and burly, and it's kind of gross. And he's like, therefore, it's never going to have the same audience. He's like, but and as I put that together, I was like, that's such a beautiful, intelligent insight that I never could have come up with on my own. Uh, I like catch wrestling, but because of my age, I don't think it's intelligent for me to pursue that as a thing that is, like a primary thing. I can pepper my jujitsu with it, but it has to be a spice and not, like the entree.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for the people that it's the entree, they're savages. Like they're very athletic, very fast, and they're very in condition. There's nothing that you can say to take away from them. But they're kind of like the rabid dogs, like they're just not going to be in a big pack.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure.
And it was funny that it came because I was like, among my listenership, I have mostly jujitsu people, and then a few catch wrestlers. And like the catch wrestlers, like they are always giving me feedback. You know, like they're like, we need this, we need that. Like they're very, very on point when it comes to expressing themselves. They're just like the Joel Bain episode, man. Like if you seen some of the emails I've got, I mean, and it's all good, but it's like there's a lot of feedback that comes from those episodes. Whereas like the jiu-jitsu ones is like, great, nice job, you know, which is fine. I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
But there's fewer of them, but man, they let their voices be heard.
I think you just have to in that kind of world, you know. Like Jake said, like it's that difference between powerlifting and CrossFit, you know. Like CrossFit had a marketing machine behind it and just made it palatable, made suffering palatable. Like you said, it
Mm-hmm.
made suffering okay.
Right. Because
Feel-
previous you had like all those dance aerobics and stuff where it was like, we want you to be in shape, but we don't want it to have to cost you anything physically. And it's like, that's not that's not really the truth, you know. CrossFit made it acceptable to suffer. Specifically, I think with the community thing that they created, and then also just with the thing of like you're gonna suffer, but it's gonna be worth it. They made the sales pitch as like, and here's the other thing, and Jake and I talked about this too, is catch wrestling, while it will never be as big as jiu-jitsu, catch wrestling will be much bigger because jiu-jitsu exists, in the
Mhm.
same way that powerlifting is now much bigger than it ever was because CrossFit exists.
Yep.
There are, you can go to a powerlifting meet now and see probably 20 to 30% women at it, which in the past there would be like two, you know. And so it has changed. It has changed the palatability of these burly ass sports too. And I think, you know, jujitsu in a way is doing that for catch wrestling. There's people who are going to learn about grappling through jujitsu and then say this catch wrestling stuff is interesting,
Mhm.
and start to go down that path. And so it'll grow that art too, just by having so many more grapplers to select from, so to speak.
Which is an awesome thing. I mean, I'm a huge fan of catch wrestling. You know, just like it wasn't really available around here,
Mm-hmm.
so you know, it was like had to kind of learn it sort of secondhand, you know, through videos or whatever, just because it wasn't really around. Um, I think one of the things that kind of holds catch wrestling back, in a sense, is people automatically assume it can't be done safely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it's like that was the thing that Joel reiterated, and again, hilarious from this mountain of a man being like, we're gonna try, basically like we're gonna kind of coddle you along in this brutal art, and it's like, hey, that sounds pretty intelligent, you know. I think one of the other big things that really holds them back is like, who's one of the most iconic figures from catch wrestling, and it's Billy Robinson,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can say that, and even pretty much if you don't have hardly any knowledge of catch wrestling at all, you probably still know who Billy Robinson is, you know? And you look at Billy walking around, especially towards the end, right? Didn't move around real well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you look at like Helio and Hoist and some of those guys, and they're still 70 and doing seminars and moving around, like getting on the mats and rolling. That's a little more palatable for the vast majority of people, you know, because if these are the people that are kind of the iconic standouts, and you look at one that's like still spry and moving around, and one that's had a lot of issues, people are probably going to be like, well, I kind of think I want to go along this route as opposed to this one.
Yeah.
I think catch has just had kind of a bad rap, you know, deservedly or not, but it has that rep of like, you're just not going to be able to do it, you know?
I don't have an answer on that. I don't know if catch wrestling is something that is kind of anathema to longevity. Like catch wrestling and longevity can't play nice together. I don't know. What I can say is the efficiency uh, that and the emphasis on use of big muscle groups against small muscle groups and things like that that people like Billy Robinson espoused, those those cross the board. Efficiency, like if we go to the idea of those fundamentals, it's something that's science based. That's the scientific wrestling element of catch wrestling, is to be, you want to be in really good condition, but your technique, if you have two equally conditioned athletes, the technical athlete wins. And so I definitely think that there is a lot that anyone, even those not interested in catch wrestling, can learn from. And if we look at Mark Kukro, he's within the Pedro Sauer Association. His start was Shudo and catch wrestling, which Shudo was kind of a Japanese catch wrestling promotion in a way. It was, there was obviously more to it than that, but that it came from catch wrestling, from the Karl Gotch school, as a matter of fact. So I think that they can play nice together. I think that there's parallels. But once again, you got to be in charge of your training. You got to make the choices of like, what's going to cost me. If something's going to take me off the mat 5 years earlier than I, would have to otherwise, then I have to not make that choice. I would love to have, like I said, a really amazing, beautiful Rafa Mendes style passing game. The physical cost for me in terms of like how much practice that's going to be is so much greater than if I put, energy into other methods of passing. And I can have a spice of that. I can have a bit of that Rafa style, like freaking looks like he's, a freaking time traveler. Like he just shows up on people's back and is like, well, how did you get there? That's probably not, I'm not going to be able to do that, but I can learn elements of it. But the time cost is going to be so much that it would be better chosen doing something that my body is going to adapt to, more readily. Maybe if I were 22 or say more athletically gifted, then that could be more in the cards. And I think it's the same with catch wrestling. You just got to make the choices and be in charge of your training and say, what's going to fit my goals, what's not going to. Just like the double leg. I don't have a great blast double, but Chris Wells introduced me to the idea that the double can be like a jab in boxing. It's not just meant to be like exclusively a takedown. It's a way of closing distance so that you can then chain wrestle and take someone down. So I think that's, catch wrestling is kind of the same thing. Like if you put it in a way that works for you, then, that's what's wrong with that,
I think that's just one of the benefits of looking across arts in general, is like they can give you a completely different spin on the exact same technique. Or just a new way of doing it, or new way, again, just new way of looking at it. Like you said, I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily thought about shooting a double in to get to the upper body tie up. Now, when I think back to when I was doing a lot of my wrestling stuff, that happened, but nobody ever told me that. Like nobody put that together for me. So like hearing that, it was like, oh, that's really neat. But looking across at just the similar grappling arts, they look at the same positions, potentially some of the same positions that jiu-jitsu guys get in from a different standpoint. So even if you weren't going to do those moves or practice those moves, just hearing how they talk about them can be a big benefit to your game and to your development over time. So just a neat interview. Just from, man, he really did take charge of his own training. Like he made it work, and it took him a long time to get there, but he made it work. So just very, very cool, guy. Glad he was just so willing to share all the kind of crazy random stuff that he did. That was
and has built a robust business in catch wrestling DVD sales and stuff among a very tiny audience. You know what I mean? Like he simultaneously built the audience and the product, and that's a pretty amazing skill. Like, once again, say what you want about Jake. There's a whole lot of people that have negative opinions about him. It's not my place to try and, like argue one way or the other. I don't care. If you can't appreciate the entrepreneurial side of him that says this thing is worth doing and I will do it. and there wasn't an audience for it, so he had to build an audience for it too. I mean, that's a tough sell, and he pulled that off. And that, you got to give the guy credit.
Yeah, for sure. So, just props to him for having that drive to do that. It's just
Yeah,
so.
walking around with only one carotid too, like that's
Yeah, dude, that Popeye story, I was like, I was just like, I don't even know. Like, I was sitting there just shaking my head, like, how did he live through that? Like,
yeah,
just
yeah,
crazy stuff. I was like, man, that's nuts.
yeah. I told him his fight name needed to be Lucky, because
Don't
at least 2 or 3 times he should have been dead. You know. Let's see. Do you want to talk about the Dan John episode to wrap it up?
We can, sure.
Let's do it. So, Dan fucking John, how do you like that shit?
Yeah, exactly. And somehow my head got blown up on this thing, and I'm like, man, that's the opposite of what I wanted. It should have been Dan John's head.
It should have. I think because I called you first, it took you as the primary, so I learned from that. But that's okay.
Man, just that dude's cool. Uh, um, I don't even know where to start, to be honest. Again, the discussion, like the fundamentals. Um, his big takeaway about sleep. Like
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing for recovery, and it's just sleep. Which is awesome. That's a big shift in the health industry now. But I think one of the things, kind of in Western society, in particular America, has always been like, look at what I can do. Like I slept 4 hours. Look at all this work I do. Like, we built up this kind of reputation, or whatever you want to call it, on like, just nose to the grindstone, just go until you break kind
Right.
of approach. And that's how you can be successful. And that dude was extremely successful. And in reading some of his books, like, there's times like, man, that dude was sleeping like 10, 11 hours a night, and still just getting all of this stuff done at a very high level.
There's something to some of his productivity ideas remind me a little bit of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he always talks about being ahead of your problems, like solve a problem before it becomes a problem. And one of his things is what he calls shark habits. And a shark habit is where you do something in one bite.
Hmm.
So he goes, if I open an email, I respond to that email then. So that's a shark habit. That's a bite. That way I don't open it and then it goes away and it gets buried in my inbox and I never see it again and I screw up. I don't reply. So doing things that need to be done immediately. If he opens a letter, or let's say he opens a bill, he doesn't set that to the side and then set aside a time to pay his bills. He just pays that bill that time and puts it in the outbox. It's like, that's a shark habit.
Yeah.
If he hasn't opened it, it hasn't been opened, it hasn't been dealt with. And if it has been opened, then it has been dealt with. So his mind is free of any clutter. He doesn't have to stop and ask, do I need to deal with this? He knows if it's open, it has been dealt with, and if it's not, it hasn't. And so I think that comes from the book 40 Years with a Whistle, which is like one of his most recent books. And it really clued me in. Actually, you can see some of that on his podcast too. He talks about it, but I really think that there's a lot to that. Like, there's ways to be productive without doing busy work. Like just moving is not necessarily being productive.
Right. So those were ones that, like, just stood out right off the bat. Man, just like he just so candid. That was such a cool thing for a dude. I mean, if you're into working out at all, like, who Dan John is,
Yeah.
and what some of his accomplishments are. I mean, like, how many books that dude's written. Like, if it tells you anything, like, Pavel talks about Dan John. So,
Mm-hmm.
again, if you're into fitness and stuff, and you're a fan of Pavel, hearing him talk about like I have a ton of respect for Dan John, like that should tell you something right there. But just it's interesting with his he's like basically he's like I could put together a program for grappling without having ever grappled and stuff because he's like I can just as long as I can understand what the needs are, so that needs assessment. um your needs change over time. um what else was it? Just, basically it was just like being consistent in doing your workouts.
Yeah, and he even had a number. I think it was like 156 or whatever the number per year. And he's like, that's 3 workouts a week. He's like, but you got to do them.
And that was so fascinating to hear that dude just be like,
It's like if you don't get your 156, you didn't do your job.
as long as he's like, and it's 3 times a week. And it's so funny to hear that it's like, because there's a bunch of there's so many programs is like 6 days a week, 5 days a week. Do that, he's like, just do 3 days a week. If you do more than that, good for you. But if you didn't do them, you didn't do your job. It's like, and it's hard to argue with that dude because he's 62, 63 years old and he still looks like he can pick up the house.
Yeah,
You know?
and competes as a masters thrower, and sets masters world records. I think he had the best throw of his life in his 50s. It was like an open national record, not a masters national record, but an open masters or an open national record. So like he's not a chump. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing.
Like, so just hearing that, and it's not like he's like, you got to sacrifice everything and you got to, make it your whole life or, that. So that was really neat to hear a guy that, again, as successful as he is within his own athletic career, but also within his business career and stuff as well. Like beyond incredibly successful as a coach, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
One thing that I like about him too is he coaches everyone from professional athletes to soccer moms trying to lose fat. He doesn't have a preference. He's like, whatever your goals are, we will create a system that you can be successful with those goals.
Mhm.
That goes right back to the Brandon McCatherine, idea of like what I do is world class, and what you choose to do with it is your choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I that's not something that I think that we should like just gloss over. I mean, he's the kind of guy who he can turn down a whole lot of people, but he doesn't. He is like, if you want to work with me, whatever your goals are, we'll do that work.
Hmm. Yeah. So just really fascinating, and then just like how much stuff he's kind of willing to give away for you know uh, what amounts to being cheap, and it's not cheap information. He's giving you like his workout generator is basically like his brain in an electronic format for a
Mm-hmm.
cheap price. Like,
Yeah, and I think we had the coupon code. Was it COVID or Corona?
yeah,
Gets you
one of those.
25% off.
Yeah, it gets you a good discount for a few months, I think.
Yeah. So if I get that wrong, guys, don't quote me on that. I think it was either 25 or 30% off.
Yeah, I think you
Uh,
just have to peek back in the. I think you put it in the show notes.
yeah.
It's definitely, but just very, very cool, very generous of him to do that. But again, just like he has a system in place. Um, that he's like, I have a system, and then based on what your goal is, like we just kind of use parts of the system to get you to those goals. And now instead of it being like you got to wait for him to take the time to do it, now it's in an electronic version of it. He's
Yeah.
like, we're cool. We just basically downloaded the information from my brain, and somebody was smart enough to put it in a computer program. Like,
And that's a testament too to sorry, that's a testament as well to how forthcoming he has been in his program design. Is that someone could take his writings and build a program generator that would be accurate because he has laid out the principles of what it takes to develop programs so well and so often that it could be done from an algorithm.
hmm yeah. Um, I think that just speaks to a solid system, solid foundation. So again, he's got that kind of skeleton to build from, and just very cool because, like you said, like he can train anybody, and he's like, if it comes up and it's like you're supposed to do this type of pressing movement, and you don't like that, you click on it and it gives you a bunch of options to do other ones. You can just fill in something else there instead. So just very, very neat approach to it, because he's a guy that could just very easily be like, I'm Dan John, you should do what I say. And it'd be like, it's hard to argue that, like you are Dan John, like shouldn't necessarily argue that. But he's just like very calm about it, being like, yeah, you don't have to do that.
Right.
Not for you, it's not for you. We'll just find something that works.
And I also liked, just in conversation, how quickly analytical he was over what, because he's not a grappler, but just by asking a few questions of what we do, he was very able to speak intelligently about what strength conditioning elements would be most beneficial to us, without without any experience with what we do. I thought that was an elucidator, if you will, of what years of experience and deliberate practice and training can provide. Is like insight. You can pick things apart really quickly when you've put all that time into picking things apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then we've mentioned it before, but he talked about the importance of just like eating vegetables,
Yeah.
eating vegetables, drink water, and avoid crap. Basically, it was like just avoid crap, and it's like, again, pretty solid advice. Very similar again to what Escaloni talked about too, where it's like, if you eat a bunch of vegetables, you're probably just not going to have a lot of space left over to eat
a bunch of shit. Yep.
And I was like, dude, it's hard to argue with that. Like, guys make pretty smart statements there. So
Another thing that I love, going back to like him and Tim Sled and Escaloni in that case, is just that ability to distill something down to a simplified form where you no longer have to do like, oh, well, do I need 5 servings of vegetables a day, or do I need, like, can I eat a Big Mac if I've done, 5 days of blah blah blah. It's like, no, eat a pound of vegetables, let that be, your starting point, and then good luck eating shit after that. It's like that will carry you through, the mental effort that you don't need to apply to it, because you're going to be so full of fiber that you're just going to feel sated all day.
and I like it because it takes quite a bit of argument out of that conversation. That's one of those areas, like nutrition is one of those things, like people like to argue a lot, or they want to hedge a lot, like, well, what about if I do this? Does that fall into my statement? Eat your vegetables, drink your water, and don't eat crap. Well, there you go. You already answered. And it puts so much of that impetus back on the person, Um, I've found that where it's like, it was also just neat for him to be like, let's just keep it really simple. We're not going to go anything complicated. Got to get your macros. Got to do this. Got to do that.
Right.
And just like, eat your vegetables. Don't eat crap. Drink some water. Have a nice day.
That'll be $1,000, please.
Right. No, it's just cool.
I just changed your fucking life.
Yeah. I just thought that was fascinating because it's just like, it reiterates what everybody knows. And instead of sitting there going like, here, let me hold your hand and guide you through this process, it's like, how about you again take charge of it yourself?
Well, and I think that, within that taking charge, there's the opportunity for so much like decision fatigue. Like the more complex you allow it to be, the more opportunity you have to screw it up, because you get tired of like just making what feel like difficult choices. When you have one choice, did I eat a pound of vegetables? No. Well, then I'm not done yet. Then going from that point, it's not hard. It then becomes hard to make a faltering decision, because if you have a pound of vegetables in your belly, it's just hard to eat crap after that. Like it's just hard. So now all of your decision, just like we were talking about shark habits and taking away like from your productivity. If I'm sitting here weighing my macros, it's like, oh, geez, so much to think about. Nope. One thing to think about. Did I eat a pound yet? Nope. Then I still got to eat more vegetables.
Yeah. So, just very, very neat. Like you said, they have that ability to distill these like kind of complicated things down into very simple approaches. And like you said, he doesn't have any grappling experience, but was able to kind of design a program outline in a few minutes, as like, again, what could maximize your time on the mats. So, just again, just cool dude. So I'm hoping he'll come back on and we can pick his brain a little bit more.
He's someone, because one of his fat loss things is, like eat, a lot of vegetables, drink a lot of water, lean proteins, and then he adds do some inefficient exercise. And how he defines inefficient exercise is what's something that you aren't good at. And so at some point I like to get him into jiu-jitsu just so that we can, talk to him about that feeling of drowning, like your first few times. Because even as a big, strong dude, he's going to have a hard time. Mm-hmm. So it would be fun to talk about the inefficiency of those first several months of grappling, just because he has such an educated opinion about how to be inefficient. And, in a way, Eric Paulson kind of talked about that. He didn't use the same language, but he had some knee problems when he was trying to do his runs. Mm-hmm. And so he started rollerblading. And he's like, guys were picking on me because I was rollerblading. He's like, but I was accomplishing the same thing.
Instead of running, right.
And I guarantee that as he was learning to rollerblade, there was a fat loss element because he was going to be inefficient just because he wasn't good at it at first.
I mean, he's sitting there doing steady state work, with that rollerblading. Man, he just had, like you said, he had some just really cool, training ideas, like just ahead of, kind of ahead of the time, ahead of the curve a little bit.
I can't wait until the pools open back up here in Kentucky, because his pool work thoughts were, to me, like, I mean, I haven't heard anyone else really talking about how to do that intelligently.
No, I think the only other person who's really even kind of brought up pool stuff was Silver Fox, and he talked about how he uses he used
the pool for recovery. Yeah.
Right. So that was a neat, again, a neat thing to have brought up, was like just like a different usage of the pool.
And I've definitely done Silver Fox's pool drills, but where Eric was using it for like breath work and just pure conditioning, like that's something I haven't heard a lot of grapplers ever talk about. And so to combine the recuperative elements of the water with breath work and cardiovascular conditioning, I think that's a real good bang for your buck use of your time.
For sure. The other one, I guess one of the other big areas for Dan was when he talked about the now what, or what now, the kind of the post competition, post things. That was really cool too. That's something, I was a lot more familiar with his kind of front end stuff in terms of the can you go. So hearing him talk about that kind of now what or what now, I don't remember if it's now what or what now.
I think it's now what.
But I thought that was really cool because it's like take that time and kind of self-assess a little bit. So again, it goes back to like kind of like take that notes, progress, things like that. But also then compare it to like what your coach think. Like, here's what you thought. How does that compare to what your coach thought? Mm-hmm. So just another fascinating way of like, you're taking charge of your own training, but you're also comparing it to the person who's helping you with your training. Like, if you're going polar opposite directions and like, here's what I thought and here's what your coach thought, like, man, there's some big disconnect going on there. There should be some, similarities. There's going to be discrepancies, of course, but there should be some similarities. There should be some common grounds in those comparisons after, a competition, whether it's like a competition, like you actually went and competed, or even just in a training in a day. There should be some consistencies there. If you're like, hey, you watched my rolls today, like, here's what I thought. What did you think? There should be some similarities in those. And if there's not, like, there's a problem there.
Right.
So I thought that was really cool. He just has those, like, really, again, those simple tools like the needs assessment, exercise, nutrition, sleep, just very simplistic approaches to that. But also, again, this kind of like now what sort of thing where it's just like, again, basically it's an assessment, but it's a post assessment that then sets up your kind of new needs analysis.
Yeah. It's like we set up our program to accomplish, A, B, and C. If we accomplished A and B, but we missed C, then our new training protocol has to emphasize C. We're not going to throw A and B out, but we need emphasis on C because C wasn't working for us. Right. And I think that's brilliant. And just like you said, that goes back to the idea of continual assessment. It ties into the notes. Like when Tim Sled was saying that he would watch world champions, at Atos or wherever else he may have seen them. After their roles, they would be writing detailed notes of like what worked and what didn't, and then that would immediately be reapplied to their drilling and their training protocols. And that's not even competition; that's just a day of rolling. But to continually be solving those problems and saying, now what? Did what I put in get me the output that I expected? If not, what input do I need to change to get that needed output? I think that's brilliant. It's simple, but it's very easy to ignore because, like if you feel like you're just going in and you're getting a really good workout, that's good, but it's not necessarily maximizing the stimulus that's offered of either a role or a competition role, because if you want to, you can treat it as both a workout, but also a very, useful data set. And then take that to influence your training forward.
Right. Yeah. I think just how he distills those things down, but again, it's just constant analysis or assessment and then adjustment from there. Kind of distill what he's saying down. It's like, have a good assessment, make your plan, and then check your plan. Did your plan work or not? And if it worked, great. And if it didn't, make a change.
Yep.
So it was really neat to hear that, and just to see, like, again, it's applicable cross sports, so to speak.
Yep. I thought it was neat that he immediately fell into the idea that a lot of the way that I approach skill development in jiu-jitsu was completely influenced by his teachings within strength training. And he's like, well, it's, yeah, to him that was obvious. It's like if you know how to get good at one thing, then you will know how to get good at anything. It's all the same stuff. And it was neat to hear, just to see like his expression. He was just like, well, duh,
Yeah. So again, but just a very cool dude. So I felt very very privileged to be a part of that interview. And with just him being just, again, such a nice guy, candid guy.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think that was kind of my big. I think that was sort of the big stuff that from him. In particular from the interview, without just like diving into all the stuff that I've read from him. So I would highly advise people, old rollers, read a bunch of his stuff. He's got a crap ton of free stuff, and it's awesome. And even if you're not a power lifter, a thrower, a football player, man, he has a lot of information that goes across the board. So definitely advise checking him out.
Yeah. My introduction to him was the T-Nation articles, like tnation.com, and you could take those and I printed some of them out. Like there were multiple ones that I printed and kept with me like a book, and referred to again and again, because They were just so well put and well thought out, and they distilled down complexity to a level that a layperson like myself could understand it. And so it was such a good foundation in strength training, but also just in training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think with that we can probably wrap it up. If you feel like there's anything else you want to cover, I think I'm pretty good.
No, I think we pretty much got through. I think that caught us all the way up to all the ones that you, at least the ones you posted. I think you did another interview here. It's just not up yet.
Yeah, and I've got one that's going to go to audio only with Steve Scott from the he's a USA judo coach, but he wanted to do audio only, so that one won't go on YouTube. It's a shame because he's a hoot and it would be fun, but he's an older guy and just like wasn't into like figuring out how to make a camera work. And I was like, I don't care, like whatever you want to do, we'll do it. And he had some awesome ideas about training and stuff, especially coming from coaching at such a high level.
Hmm. Well, that's awesome, man. I'm looking forward to hearing those.
Yep. We'll go ahead and stop the recording here.